Good evening. My name is Jonathan Albin, and this is Nycos Launchpad. I'm considered to be Game Master J. I've been a storyteller and game master for roleplay games for very nearly 50 years. And with my expertise in administering stories, creating new and innovative environments, and in general, being a creative and imaginative person, I endeavor with the Nycos Launchpad to give you perhaps a concept and a resource for your own development as a person, as a storyteller, and as a general human being. So the question then becomes, what is the Launchpad and what is its purpose? The concept of the Nycos Launchpad is really a an idea that you can restart life in a new and creative way that that will give you back the resources that you had when you were being newly minted on this planet, so to speak. The wonder, the challenge, the excitement of being children really is essential to the way human beings operate. And although we, generally speaking, grow out of the creative and imaginative portion of our lives and become real, we, as the saying goes, we walk away from the childish things, childlike things, and instead we walk into the more mature and decisive adult ways. But the reality is that many times we leave behind essentials from our youthful minds and leave them somewhere in the background. And so this Launchpad purpose is really an idea of restarting that process and putting our minds back into a place where our creativity, our imagination, our wonder, our general exuberance for life is reinstated. So it functions as mental floss. It allows you to reacquire the real objectives of life. What is essential, what is important, what is necessary to function, but more than just exist, to actually go on to live a new process, a new life. This also means that we can quickly realign. One of the other tools gives us the ability to quickly realign our intent with our purpose. Quite often we find ourselves spinning wheels and working very hard on one part of the process, or one part of our personality, or one part of our economic advancement, or whatever, and we get so stuck on that one that we forget how to realign what is really going on in our lives to what we really intend and what we are really put here to do. Some people consider the idea of destiny or objective life, or some dynamic that's beyond us. And I'm not speaking here necessarily of a mystical approach. I am instead speaking of the very concept of becoming what we are here to be. We all intrinsically feel the need for progression, advancement, generally speaking. Now, of course, there are those who fall outside of any norms, so any absolute statement is, of course, ludicrous on its face. But the idea here is that if we can align what we feel important in our lives with the things that we do, then we will start to feel the progress and advancement of those things in the real world. A third thing that you can get from the Launchpad is a working vocabulary, a way of defining the things that you do uniquely to yourself, so that there's a checksum on it. We all operate on a different operating system, right? We're unique individuals, and our brains are all wired similarly, but not the same. And so sometimes we have things in our lives that cannot be defined by other people clearly enough. And so we have to be able to develop an understanding of our own working vocabulary in order to be able to make relative changes and adjust things. So we'll go more into that in a minute. But these are all given so that we have an opportunity to achieve more, to become more, to do more than we already are in our processes of being a human being. We can see more people if that's what we're wanting, and we can create more lasting relationships. We can overcome the difficulties that have formed. We may have habits or patterns that we want to reestablish or adjust. And the means to do so are going to be found right here in the Launchpad. Even our mental agility, how quickly we can respond, and our adaptability on the fly in moments of stress and concern become better when we have the tools to rapidly respond and to make those changes. Further, most of us have an awareness of our subconscious, and some of us have the capacity to readily recollect our dreams, and others can actually go so far as to actually operate in a lucid environment while they're asleep. And these abilities to tap into the unconscious mind or subconscious mind are critical to advancing along or generic or complete advancement line, so to speak. We also need to develop the ability to coherently comprehend and decisively act. Many times we get into situations where there is stress and there are dynamics, and we fall into the fight, flight, freeze mentality, and we just simply can't process quickly enough or assess coherently enough. And so having a new way to consider those moments of stress and dynamics gives us a better handle on our own life in terms of the day-to-day emergencies. And in effect, the Launchpad is actually overall an imagination toolbox. Our lives are spent in many cases learning how to operate, our intellectual side, our mathematical side, our analytical side, but we don't really very much spend time developing or utilizing the imagination side of our brains, of our minds. We have the ability to do so, but we often don't have the tools. And the Launchpad's purpose is to be that imagination toolbox. So, within the Launchpad, there are several components, and we're going to go over each one of them on an initial an initiation basis. So I will be speaking of each one for a bit so that you understand how each one functions and why we have it in the toolbox. But these are all things that on their own would be entire courses. There would be entire conversation about why they developed and how they developed and what we can use them for. And so we're going to take a look at those. First one we're going to consider is the idea or the concept of clearing the baffles. I know this has happened for you as it has for me. You're in the middle of a day. There are 20 things that are on your mind in a back burner kind of way, and you're kind of churning away on which one of them you're going to do next. And all of a sudden, some major dynamic shift, some major panic falls into our lives. That there's something we have to handle immediately. And when we have a brain full of soup, when we've got all these other ideas, many people call this concept the mind fog, that they're just simply musing on too many things at once, and so therefore they don't have a way to discern, let alone respond to new stimulus. And so a process called clearing the baffles is Launchpad's way of creating a momentarily instant reset. Put simply, it's an idea of how to psychologically dump all the other ideas that you have in your head out of the way so that the new material that's coming in can be mentally manipulated, that you can actually take the thing, whatever that thing is that's fallen into your life, and consider what its value is and how it operates, what its parameters are, which resources you're going to need to put into place, what assets from your personal arsenal can you draw upon instantaneously to consider and process this, and how much can you simply allow from the new information to kind of take over positioning in your brain. This idea of clearing the baffles is an exercise, if you will, in discipline, where you actually are going to think about what you're thinking, and in that process you're going to set limits and parameters around this new concept, whether it be, okay, it's a family issue, no, it's a work issue, no, it's a community issue, whatever. You're going to give it parameters and therefore be able to start physically analyzing it and turning it over in your mind to give you an opportunity to realize how much, or arguably how little, control you have over this particular condition. And when we start to think of the things in our lives as conditions, whether they are imposed or accepted or created, this concept of a individual condition is therefore manageable. It's not something that you have to lose your, pardon my phrase, lose your shit over, because you can actually recognize the parameters of this dynamic, whatever it happens to be, and codify it into conditions and responses, and how to interact with it so that it can be resolved. In addition to the clearing of the baffles, it's important to also get a paradigm identifier. And what this refers to is oftentimes our knee-jerk response to stimulus is perhaps rather different, maybe marginally, but maybe sometimes significantly different from our initial response is different from our normative or normal response. And so by utilizing a paradigm identifier to actually think about thinking about what you're responding to a stimulus with, which set of lenses are you looking through at the time, this allows you to therefore more deeply analyze, right? You're able to assess the conditions of the world by recognizing where you are in your mindset that caused you to have that initial reaction. And it's really important that we understand that our ability to interact with others, our ability to interact with ourselves, really is a matter of keeping our mental awareness almost separate from the activities that we're engaged in. Certainly we use our minds for analysis or mathematics or conceptualization. But in addition to that, we can actually assess how we're assessing. And that's what the paradigm identifier fundamentally does. It gives you a way to acknowledge the resources that you have and put them to proper use, and perhaps shift your paradigm to allow for better analysis of a specific condition. And this next one is actually kind of fun. The idea of naming the rose is the concept that when we are working through life, we can take the things that have been described to us and defined to us that give us a concept of how things work that is not ours, and make it so. When we are naming the rose, we are putting the parameters on the world around us in terms that make sense to us, and therefore we have the ability to more rapidly, with the form of shorthand, if you will, move mental material around in our heads. Again, we're talking about a change in imagination, so many of the things that I even talk about, I have to realize and check myself, because now when I'm talking about moving or manipulating things within the mental space, that itself may be a little bit beyond the sphere. So let me back up and say this. We often have our way of seeing things, and it doesn't always match up with others around us. By coming up with a process for naming the rows, we can put our names on the things that others already have words for that we can't. So in other words, something that somebody has offered that doesn't make any sense to us, we can now rename into our own wordsmithed environment, and thereby be able to create tools for grasping and changing and literally moving ideas around within our mental space. And we'll come back to that more in a moment. The transition protocols is something that I started a while ago, and realizing that it is actually part of the Launchpad was kind of a revelation to me. The idea is that we are constantly in transition. We're always moving from who we are to who we're going to be. We're going from the person that we were, or person that others have perceived us to be, into the person that we want them to see. And sometimes that process is easy and smooth and all of that, and then other times it's downright rough. It's downright difficult. Pardon me. The transition protocols are basically a framework for personal adjustment. In other words, one of the things you'll notice that if you've watched me for any time, that the facial hair changes. Sometimes I'm down to just a mustache. Sometimes I shave it all off. Sometimes I've got a full bushy beard. The process in my mental state is associated in my mental state with my appearance. And so for me, it's dynamically helpful to actually mechanically transition at the beginning of each one of my transitions in my mental state. And therefore, there's not a way to measure it. It's not like, well, if the hair on my face is a 1/4 inch long and I don't have any cheek hair, then I'm having this kind of a time period. It's not like that. But it is that the very necessary dynamic change triggers mental adaptability and malleability. You can actually change your mindset when you're more flexible, and to be so, you need to be in a transition mindset. And I know in today's world that word transition has huge political ramifications, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm literally talking about moving from one state of being to the next state of being, and that transition has certain regimented steps that you can put into place to allow for a radical renovation of the identity and even your own attitudes. This next one's pretty fun. The concept here is that we've all been told from our childhood onward that first you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this. And that processing, that linear step-by-step processing, is itself a danger to our development because it limits the speed at which we can function, because we're dedicating our life to the points in numeric order: first, second, third, fourth. The domino principle comes from a concept. I've watched several of these. You've probably seen them on the internet. These individuals who build huge domino cascading mechanisms, and then how satisfying it is for one of the dominoes to fall over and they progress around. And that's beautiful. But there are quite a few times in those domino mechanisms where something goes askew and one of them doesn't function. And the system itself crashes to a halt at that moment because everything was dependent upon that previous step. So what the domino principle is a conceptual place where instead of working on one facet of your life at a time in order to achieve your levels of success, instead you work on all the dominoes at the same time, just incrementally pushing them all slightly towards the process of falling. And the reality is that if you do that, if you were actually able to build the entire domino chain at a time, eventually one of them lets go. And when it does, the inevitability of all of them falling is assured. And so the concept of the domino principle is to find ways to work on all the different phases of your creative process in effect at the same time. Not exactly at the same time. It's not true multitasking, but it's redefining multitasking in terms of I work a little on this and a little on that and a little on this and a little on that as I'm building my motivation and building my process, so that the entire domino principle is setting me up for success. Because if I've built my domino chain towards the objective and the dominoes all fall at the, whether they fall at the same time or one of them begins and the rest of them cascade, the entire process is going to be reaching its objective inevitably. Another really fun part of the Launchpad components is the concept of the chainstorm. A chainstorming event is in some ways people would compare it with a brainstorming session where you sit down and say we're going to work on a certain concept and we're just going to throw everything mud at the wall until we get to our objective. Well, a chainstorm is sort of like that in that you're definitely spontaneously spinning out imaginative new things. But the chainstorm is you actually are saying we are trying to move from this point to that point, and anywhere along the line we might get a burst of this energy, this dynamic of the brainstorm. And so as you're moving down the chainstorm, you can stop and build on one of them as long as your brains are really active. And as they go fallow there, perhaps someplace before in the line, another chainstorm nodes will appear and you'll go to work on that, or perhaps one further down the chain towards the conclusion. But the idea is that the chainstorm doesn't have a temporal limit. The human mind can work in the past, present, and future at the same time. Granted, we can't change the past, but we certainly can interpret, grab new resources. And they've proven over and over again that the human memory is a fallible thing. It's a malleable thing. And so we can actually reverse some of our internal stinking thinking, if you will, by simply looking back to where the negative process came from and chainstorm around that till we find out what actually was driving it. And this dynamic thought process gives us a new mechanism for handling. Remember, we were talking about when a new concept falls in our lap, sometimes it takes more than just an individual idea. It takes the entire process. And a chainstorming event gives you the ability to dynamically think through the situation and consider all of the conditions that might apply. Now, there are 1,000 books out there. I'm probably exaggerating, but there are a lot of books out there that talk about lucid dreaming. And from my experience with it, it is a learnable response. You know, there are, in the case of the Nycos Launchpad, the component for lucid dreaming does include an overview of how to establish a lucid dreaming environment and how to engage your subconsciousness. Maybe not in a fully conscious way, but in a more conscious way to allow you to access the results more directly. And this lucid dreaming includes not only visualization and awareness, but it also deals with learning how to engage with the demons, the scary, the misunderstood portions of our mental struggle, and be able to put them into a better context. And this next one is kind of an interesting point, the very concept of concept triage. As you may know, the term triage refers to the idea that our mental energies can be misused or unfortunately derailed if we allow them to. And so a concept triage simply says, as a challenge comes in, as a new portion comes in, we immediately can assess look through it and say, okay, is this concept something that is important? Is it urgent? Is it necessary to our lives? Because if it falls anywhere other than these three, we can table it, we can put it aside, we can acknowledge it, define it, put it in the box, so to speak. But it's mainly set up so that we're able to define rapidly whether a given concept or a given condition is worthy of spending a lot of energy on. And utilizing concept triage is really helpful when determining a course of action, because there are so many pieces that fall into our minds as far as what needs to be done that we sometimes don't know which ones we should work on first. And concept triage helps us to align them and define them. So I would say, if you ask the question, what is the Launchpad? The Launchpad is a method for exploration beyond the sphere, and I put an extra I in. And beyond the sphere, of course, is a homage to a story I heard a long time ago. A individual was describing a working process, and when it came to the time of talking about what I thought, I put in that I think we should be considering beyond the sphere. And when I did, there was a guy beside me that reached over and touched my arm and said, "John, that's outside the box." And the point is that he had gotten so used to using one framework that another framework itself was alien to him, and therefore he couldn't even conceive of that concept being different or greater than his own. The idea here is that we have to be able to explore beyond the sphere, because the sphere is what's kept us right where we are throughout our lives. It's the means by which we limit ourselves in what we're doing, where we're going, what's possible. And the idea here is that the Nycos Launchpad is a way to catapult yourself beyond your current state into the other states of being that you will find perhaps more rich, more dynamic, and more useful. I hope this has been a helpful video. I hope this has gotten across the basic concepts of the Nycos Launchpad. And certainly, if you have any questions or comments, I'd be glad to entertain them. If you are on air with me and you want to present it, you can type your comments or questions into the chat box. If you are watching this on YouTube later or whatever, certainly leave me a comment or two. How would a launchpad like this be useful to you? What would it be worth for you to be able to return to the creative, imaginative, and fun person you were earlier in your life? What would it be worth to you to stop vacillating and start your life rolling down the course towards what you want to accomplish? I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master J. I've been a Game Master for 50 years, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you like what you see, make sure you follow the channel, and if you want to be a part of what we're doing, check out patreon.com/Nycos. I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master J, and I thank you again, and I'll see you in another video.